Okay. Now we have learned what are the determinants of GDP, and now we will learn what factors are not included in GDP calculation. Here we have 6 points or 6 factors which are not included in GDP calculation. That is capital gains and losses, intermediary goods and services, free of charge, no consideration of previous production and transaction, interest on public debt and illegal activities. So, what about capital gains and losses? This factor is not included in GDP calculation. Intermediary goods and services. These are not the finished goods and services. These are intermediary goods and services. Goods and services free of charge. That is non-economic goods and services. And no consideration of previous production and transaction. That means earlier production or transaction which has been transacted long time before or in the previous year. Okay, interest on public debt. Whatever the government is owing from the public, interest on public debt is not a factor in GDP calculation. And the illegal activities. Obviously, earning from any kind of illegal activities or production from any kind of illegal activities is not included in GDP calculation. But for your further knowledge, I am explaining point by point in the next slides. Okay. The total market price of the final products and services in an economy at a specific time is known as the gross domestic product. Okay. The total market price of the final products and services in an economy at a specific time. And when we are calculating the GDP, we have the point here, capital gains and losses. And what is capital gain and loss? And with the change of time, there may occur changes in national resources or factors of production, or the price of the produced goods resulting into profit or loss. Okay, whenever we are in the production process, with the change of time, there may occur changes in national resources also, and the factors of production or the price of the produced goods can be changed, and all these changes will result into profit or loss, and this profit or loss is not counted in calculating the GDP. Okay, because the profit or the loss due to the change in the price of the resources in course of time does not influence determining the national income. And besides, the profit or loss is recorded only in the cases of an individual business institution. While there is profit for one institution, the same amount of loss occurs for another. Obviously, the transaction is between two. If one is the gainer, other is the loser. So, if there is profit for one institution, the same amount of loss occurs for another. So, these are not actually counted well, or that does not influence the GDP. The influence of profit or loss in calculating the GDP is totally zero. And the next topic is intermediary goods and services. And to calculate the national income, only the final goods and services are considered. You know that. Only the final goods and services are considered, and because the price of the intermediary goods and services are included in the final goods and services. Okay, the price of the raw materials or intermediary goods and services are always included in the price of the final goods and services, so we don't need to calculate again, okay, the price of intermediary goods and services. So we must omit, these will not included in GDP calculation. And in the intermediary, goods and services are considered again after the final products. There will be the problem of double counting. And for this reason, the intermediary goods and services are not at all considered while estimating the GDP, to avoid the process of double counting. Okay. The third point is goods and services free of charges. That means the non-economic activities. Okay, there are some goods and services in the economic systems which are not bought or sold through the market, which are not transacted in the market. What are they? They are the mother's love, the parents' love. Suppose the mother is rearing her children, she is cooking and doing all the household work. Are you paying your mother? No, we don't pay for that work. If a singer is singing on the stage, or for a TV program, or for an audio program, then he or she will be paid. But if the same singer singing to his friend, for his friend, then it will be a non-economic activity. He is not getting paid for that song. Okay, so these are non-economic activities and these are not produced goods actually. Okay, therefore, while estimating the GDP, the value of these services cannot be included. These are non-economic activity. If there is a person who is a teacher, basically a teacher, if he does a job getting a salary, then it's a economic activity and there is a produced goods. And for that profession he is getting salary and it is a economic activity. It will be calculated in GDP. But if the same person, the teacher, is teaching at home, he or she is teaching the children or the kids of his own or the siblings, then it's a non-economic activity because he is not getting paid for this job or this work. So whenever there is no transaction, any buying selling idea through the market is done, then these are called goods and services free of charge, and these are not included in GDP calculation. The fourth point here is no consideration for previous production and transaction. Okay, GDP is calculated for a certain year and that does not include any production of any previous year in the GDP of that year, because every year GDP is calculated. In every fiscal year GDP is calculated. If we count the price of old cars or old houses or old flats, similarly the exchange of stocks, bonds or any paper, okay, that was sold in the previous year, then what will happen? We are double counting again. Okay, we are again counting the same resource which is not transacted in this year. So that will have a misguidance in calculating the GDP. So while we are calculating the GDP for a certain year, we will never include any production or transaction which is done in the previous year. So price of the old things, old cars, old houses, old assets or anything, old investment is not included in the GDP. And the price of these products is included in the GDP of that year when they were bought. Okay, when they were transacted, in that specific year they are recorded, but in later year they will not be recorded or included in GDP. Here the problem of double counting arises, like intermediary goods and services. Okay, and now we will talk about interest on public debt. So, what's interest on public debt? The interest against a government loan is not be included in the GDP. The interest against a governmental loan is not included in the GDP. For example, a loan taken by the government during a war does not contribute to the national production, and the interest against the loan is taken to be the transferable due. It is a due. So therefore, it is excluded from the GDP because this interest is not at all contributing in production, and it's basically a due to the government, and therefore it is excluded in GDP. Okay, and the last topic here is illegal activities. We found that the illegal activities, and income from any illegal activity is not included in estimating the national income. Illegal activities mean by any activity that is not acceptable socially and is against the prevailing law of the country. Okay, it is not at all acceptable and it is legally against the law and legally not acceptable in society. So with this kind of activity, whatever the income or production comes, we will not include them in GDP. So whenever we are calculating the GDP, these 6 factors will not include. Okay. So the 6 factors here, capital gains and losses, we will not count that because some company will be gainer and obviously the other will be loser. And whenever we are counting the gains and losses, the result will be 0. So it will be not included in the GDP. Intermediary goods and services are not included in the GDP because there will be double counting. Goods and services free of charge, which are not paid, which are not transacted through the market, which are non-economic activities. No consideration of previous production and transaction because they are already transacted, they are already calculated on that specific year. So we don't need to calculate it again. It will create the problem of double counting. Interest on public debt. Interest on public debt, it is a loan to the government. So it is a due. Basically, it's a due and it has no contribution in production. So it will be not included in GDP. And illegal activities. If the activity is against the prevailing law and is not acceptable in society, we will not take or we will not consider the production from these activities. Okay, so these 6 factors will not included in GDP calculation. So see you in the next class with some new topics. And we have learned the ideas of national income. We have learned the differences between national income and the gross domestic product. Okay, in between we have learned net factor income and the CCA. We have compared the national income and the net national product. We have learned the 3 systems of measuring national income. What are the approaches or the system? The production approach, the income approach, and the expenditure approach. We have learned about the per capita GDP. We have learned what are the determinants of GDP. There are 5 determinants. And we have learned what are the factors which are not included in calculating GDP. Okay, so See you in the next class. Thank you for being with me. Allah Hafiz. And in the next class, we will learn about the GDP calculation system of Bangladesh. Okay, till then, stay healthy and happy.